Okay, happy Tuesday, everyone. Now, before you get an early start on National Sangria Day, which is tomorrow, we've got a pretty potent webinar lined up for you, and it's powered by NV Energy. And today, we're going to delve into a new subject area, one that I certainly can't recall discussing during my time doing these webinars, that's for sure. I'm talking about this demand-side energy management strategy and blockchain. You see, the landscape of demand-side energy management is rapidly transforming. With the onset of such innovations as the Internet of Things, advanced metering, and dynamic utility tariffs, there are some real opportunities for customers and utilities to capture value from demand flexibility. What opportunities, you ask? Well, luckily, we've got Sam Hartnett here to provide us with some guidance. Sam is an associate at the Rocky Mountain Institute, where he currently works on accelerating the adoption of blockchain technology in the energy sector with the Energy Web Foundation. His previous work at RMI includes optimized microgrid designs and demand management strategies for mines, as well as researching the impacts of time-based tariffs and residential demand response for the largest utility in the U.S. Prior to RMI, Sam spent 4.5 years working at Enernoc, an energy software and demand response provider, where he held various operations and product development roles in Boston, San Francisco, and down under in Melbourne, Australia. His experiences include managing operations strategy for demand-side management programs across the Asia-Pacific region, developing tools and applications to automate business processes and decrease operational risk, and creating go-to market strategies for energy management products. In addition to clean energy, Sam is passionate about outdoor education, and he previously worked as a naturalist in Grand Teton National Park, as well as the White River National Forest. Now, I know this audience wants to get right to Sam's presentation, but before we do, I've got to tell you about PowerShift by NV Energy. You can never save too much energy or money. That's why NV Energy has introduced PowerShift to help its residential and business customers conserve even more energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift by NV Energy is also about providing you with excellent customer service. It's your one-stop shop to find all the energy-efficient products and services to help you boost your bottom line, along with convenient ways to manage your account. PowerShift Energy Advisors are dedicated to working side by side with business customers to discuss their needs and to find energy efficiency solutions that save money. Plus, their Business Solutions Center is the place to go to discuss your bill payments and account-related questions. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. During the course of today's presentation, you can submit questions for our guest. Simply use the questions box that is probably on the right side of your screen. We're going to set aside time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. I'm going to review those questions, and I'll pose them to Sam, like I said, after his presentation. So, Sam, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Mike, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Sam Hartnett, and I'm an associate at Rocky Mountain Institute, and I work with our Energy Web Foundation team. Today, I'm going to be talking about the role of blockchain in the future of distributed energy resources and demand-side management. And I want to start with just a little bit of background on EWF. So EWF is a standalone nonprofit co-founded by Rocky Mountain Institute and the blockchain technology company Grid Singularity. We've partnered with approximately 20 affiliate companies representing various stakeholders in the energy system, including utilities, suppliers, retailers, and grid operators, and we're currently seeking additional affiliates. So if you or your organization is interested, please feel free to get in touch. Our mission at EWF is to develop an open source blockchain to power new applications that create value in the energy sector. We have 4 primary goals. The first is to identify use cases for blockchain and work with our affiliate partners to develop applications and projects. The second is to build a public open source blockchain to host a new suite of distributed applications. Third is to cultivate an ecosystem of developers, hardware vendors, and users to develop standards and best practices for energy and blockchain. And lastly, we're engaging with regulators to educate them on new possibilities and to help create opportunities for innovation in the market. So the agenda for today, we'll start with a bit of background on transformation and transition in the energy sector today, why blockchain is relevant to this transition. Then we're going to dive into some specific use cases for blockchain in the energy sector, follow it with some implications for different stakeholders, and then, as Mike mentioned, leave some time for Q&A at the end. So the biggest trend in the power system today is a shift in economies of scale. This is migrating from upstream to downstream with distributed resources and renewable energy progressively replacing conventional generation. The cost of grid supplied electricity is increasing in many parts of the world, even as demand is flat or decreasing. The peak demand to average demand ratio is increasing, and the utilization of infrastructure is down. As old infrastructure needs replacement, fixed costs dominate the legacy system. Conversely, the cost of distributed resources, including renewable energy and storage, is plummeting. And increasingly, there's economies of scale to be found, particularly with technologies like PVs, efficient lighting, and batteries. In addition, IT solutions are helping coordinate new aggregated bundles of devices ranging from electric vehicles to water heaters and other appliances. And the current system was built in an era when economic growth and energy consumption increased hand in hand steadily. Building large power plants and a massive transmission and distribution network made sense financially and socially. In fact, investment in centralized infrastructure has historically been one of the safest, generating reliable, fixed returns enabled by regulation. But like many other industries, value is shifting from owning, building, and operating assets to providing services to customers. This is less capital intensive and can generate more reliable revenue. And in a new twist for the energy sector, customers can actually now provide services back to the grid, leveraging distributed resources and demand-side management. So as we're talking about this macro trend, and if you follow it to their logical conclusion, you could design a system based solely on physics, resilience, and the economic interest of individuals that would look very different than the one that we have today. And you would probably start with a home or any building. And the buildings today are full of all kinds of energy using devices that are increasingly connected to the internet and controllable by applications or a central system. Many homes and other buildings, especially in the future, are likely to have some form of generation, like a rooftop PV system and or a storage asset, either in the form of a stationary battery, an electric vehicle, or thermal storage like water heaters or HVAC systems. And using applications, you might be able to set preferences for every single device. You might be able to dictate what time of day you want to use it, how much you're willing to pay to use it, and thus what an incentive would need to be to get you to turn it off. And then you can even dictate how much energy you'd be willing to sell back to the grid, either from a generation or from load flexibility at specific times for set prices. And by doing this, you effectively create a market within a building and can dispatch different resources to achieve balance. And this can play out across every building. And some are going to have more or less on-site generation. Some will have more or less storage, but all are going to have load flexibility to varying degrees. Inevitably, buildings are going to need to communicate and transact with each other because very few are going to be able to meet the total demand at all times. The cheapest and most reliable power is local, so the next level of supply and demand balancing outside of the building could come from a street level market. And it's worth noting that both the physical dispatch of assets and the financial clearing would take place at this level, just like wholesale markets function today. And as you move up the hierarchy, you arrive at the distribution grid level, where assets like community scale PV, larger buildings, and other infrastructure come into play. Energy prices will vary throughout the day and might be cheaper or more expensive than generation at the lower tiers, and it could be attractive to purchase energy from the lower levels and store it for later, or sell it to parties at the street level. Each grid level can transact with the one above it and below it at an aggregated level to achieve balance. And then finally, you would get to the high voltage grid, where utility scale assets provide balancing services to the lower tiers in the system. And in this, the role of the high voltage grid is completely reversed to today. So rather than providing baseload and acting as the primary source of supply, its role is focused on balancing services and acting as a safety net for the lower tiers in the system. And the result is a new market design that's inverted compared to today's. The value starts at the customer, and individual buildings can rely at least partially on their own supply and then monetize excess capacity or load flexibility in multiple recursive markets. These recursive spot, balancing, and futures markets can provide grid stability and multiple revenue streams, and traditional capacity markets are no longer needed. Zero margin resources can balance the grid from the bottom up, which inevitably leads to a diminished role for centralized assets like combined cycle gas plants. And all of the physical dispatch and financial settlement can take place on the blockchain. So I want to talk now a little bit more about why blockchain is relevant to all this. But first, I want to quickly review and make sure we have a common understanding of what we mean when we talk about blockchain. So in simple terms, a blockchain is a distributed ledger with a particular set of governing rules. Cryptography is used to encrypt data and protect the integrity of the ledger. Transaction data is added to the ledger in blocks, which are all linked to previous blocks by a cryptographic signature, making it practically impossible for anybody to retroactively change the ledger. The result is all computers in the network have visibility into the ledger and agree upon a single source of truth. The blockchains can be public, like the Bitcoin and Ethereum networks. They can be private and managed by different companies, or they can be somewhere in between. They can be used to support digital currencies, track and trade digital assets representing real-world assets, or simply share data between parties who don't fully trust each other. And this last point is profound. By commoditizing trust, it enables a radical shift in the way that parties interact with each other. Think about all of the industries that exist because of the need for brokers and middlemen in transactions, as well as all the time and money and effort that goes into auditing and verifying data. There are a lot of different blockchain projects in existence today, and they all vary in terms of design, governance, and use, but broadly speaking, all blockchains share these elements in common. They are cyber secure, and cryptography prevents tampering with data, meaning that you can trust the information on the chain without relying on an independent third party. Blockchains are distributed, and a decentralized network of computers maintains the network, so there's no single point of failure and no single super user who can be compromised. These ledgers are immutable, which is a byproduct of the design, and since the data cannot be changed by anyone, there's guaranteed integrity of the information in perpetuity. Blockchains are also relatively low cost for conducting transactions, so users who want to conduct transactions will face low or no fees, which enable transactions that might be prohibitive in traditional models. And one of the more exciting developments in the blockchain space is the development of smart contracts, which are bits of computer code that can automate business logic, which allows you to effectively replace legalese with objective code and automate transactions to occur if and only if certain criteria are met. So what does this mean for the energy sector? Blockchain technology can support the deployment and the utilization of distributed resources by unlocking new revenue streams, providing better visibility into performance, and automating control of devices. It can reduce the risks of cyber attack to the grid, especially when considering that our current system is highly vulnerable. It can support new business models based on the control and or measurement of internet-connected smart devices. It can increase the resiliency of the operating system managing the grid, as well as the grid itself. And it can create new markets for renewable energy using the blockchain to track the generation, measure the output, and issue certificates that can be monetized for generators and buyers. You can think of blockchains as an elegant way to fuse markets and physical technologies. So you can piggyback off of existing assets like home control systems and internet-connected devices and develop a platform in which devices are connected on a decentralized network of computers. Both utilities and consumers can use smart contracts to set preferences for buying and selling energy. In the context of utilities, this could extend beyond traditional time of use pricing and allow pricing and tariffs based on other attributes that reflect the true cost of energy or other factors like the location of the generation. Consumers can set preferences for how they would want to buy and sell electricity, if applicable. Smart contracts and distributed applications can perform the role of a market operator, dispatching assets and performing financial clearing. And all of this data can be stored on a secure ledger that enables sharing between these parties and supports the transition from manual, retroactive metering and settlement into near real time. The result are new ways to manage and value distributed resources and support the beginnings of a bottom-up recursive market design. I want to talk a little bit about the blockchain being developed by EWF. And there are three design principles in particular that are worth highlighting. So the first is the EWF blockchain will use what's called a proof of authority consensus mechanism, in which known trusted validators are responsible for approving transactions and adding blocks to the chain. The result of this is that faster transaction speeds can be achieved, and the EWF chain is currently capable of 2,500 transactions per second, which for comparison, the Bitcoin network can handle approximately 7 transactions per second. This governance model is also desirable because the energy sector is highly regulated, so having a bounded set of validators can make it easier to react to any issues, perform updates on the network, and appease any regulators who are concerned about fully decentralized operations and control of the electricity system. Second, the EWF chain is a public but permission system that allows for 3 types of computers on the network. When I talk about permission, what that means is that not every single computer in the network is able to view the entire ledger, and there's the ability to limit the types of transactions that different nodes can perform or the type of access that they get. In addition, there's different levels of computing power required for establishing a validator node versus connecting an ordinary device. It's very easy to purchase a simple piece of hardware that's low cost and energy efficient and connect it to any appliance and connect it to the chain at low cost, effectively turning a regular appliance into an IoT device. Lastly, the EWF chain is supporting whitelisted smart contracts and secret smart contracts. The former is simply a way of approving a smart contract on the network so that every user knows that it's safe and reliable. And the second uses zero-knowledge cryptography to enable transactions in which no information about the parties or the transaction itself are revealed, but you can prove that the transaction is compliant with a given rule or regulation. And this is particularly appealing to a number of participants in the energy sector that have data confidentiality or contractual arrangements with each other that want to limit data sharing. Now I want to dive into some more specific applications for blockchain and energy. And there are hundreds of use cases across multiple sectors ranging from finance to healthcare to supply chain management. And we've identified over 100 use cases in the energy sector alone. But we've narrowed our focus on 4 application domains that we believe have the most value in the near term. The first is operational improvement, which practically means automating different business processes and data sharing to reduce overhead costs and administrative burdens. Second is traceability, so using the blockchain to track the full life cycle of a given asset or resource. The third is distributed resource participation, and I'll discuss this in a few slides, but we think the blockchain can provide greater visibility, control, and accurate measurement of distributed energy resources. And then lastly, transactive energy, which broadly means supporting new market mechanism using a blockchain-based agent to replace traditional markets and market operators and support that recursive market design and peer-to-peer trading that I discussed earlier. So first, traceability and certificates of origin, or as they're better known in a lot of places, renewable energy credits. Consumers of all types, from large corporations, universities, cities, and even residential customers, are buying renewable energy in support of their own sustainability goals or because of a mandate. And in many cases, these buyers are purchasing energy produced from facilities that are far away from their own location via virtual power purchase agreements or through acquiring renewable energy credits. These instruments enable renewable facilities to expand their potential buyer market and enable buyers greater access to renewable energy, even if it's not co-located where they are. But the current system for renewable energy credits in particular is opaque and fragmented. There is no standard across regions and markets. To credibly claim credit for renewable energy, you need to be able to verify the source of the electricity, create a credit for a given unit of energy, and then the REC can be traded and sold, but only claimed once before it's retired to prevent double counting and to maintain the integrity of the system. So this process is complicated and managed by brokers in many markets. A blockchain-based application could drastically simplify this process. In this system, you could connect a renewable generator of any size directly to the chain and monitor its output. A digital token could be created to represent a given unit of energy, and that token would be traded, sold, or claimed directly on the chain with a full audit trail and history of ownership. Once it's claimed, it would be automatically retired. By lowering the barriers to entry and simplifying this process, you enable new participants on both sides, both buyers and generators. So homeowners could sell excess production from their rooftop PV system and earn revenue from selling RECs. Small and medium businesses who have historically been left out of corporate renewable purchasing could much more easily procure renewable credits. And this level of traceability would allow utilities to offer more sophisticated tariffs that can be based on things like carbon intensity or location, giving preference to renewable local sources of electricity. Energy efficiency is also a really attractive proposition for all stakeholders, from building owners to utilities to regulators to tenants. But despite the market being valued in the tens of billions of dollars, it remains largely untapped. And there are several challenges. There's no universal way to measure savings easily at the device or project level. And as a result, it can be difficult to quantify the benefits and create incentive structures that accurately reflect the value of the project. According to NREL, it's estimated that for every dollar spent on project implementation, an additional dollar is spent on general program administration, which is a prohibitive cost structure to increasing scale. So with blockchain, it's possible to use a very simple computing device like a Raspberry Pi to connect any appliance or piece of equipment to the blockchain as a light client. And this allows granular measurement and instantaneous savings calculations in more complex incentive structures. This level of visibility can help building owners better understand and communicate the value of efficiency and help make a stronger case for investment in further projects. In multi-tenant buildings, blockchain can support advanced incentive structures with custom solutions for different user types, and it could enable a tenant to keep credit for an efficiency measure that they funded if they move locations, or conversely, enable an owner to transfer an incentive or a credit for an efficiency measure to a new tenant if they were the one funding it. This can help differentiate real estate spaces in a highly competitive market. And for utilities, easier measurement and verification and aggregation can both improve the ability to quantify system benefits and reduce overhead costs for administering EE programs. There's similar potential value for performing measurement and verification and settlement for demand response resources on the blockchain. Today, demand response is limited to regulated markets and programs, many of which have fixed incentives, particularly for residential and small to medium businesses. The majority of demand response capacity is provided by large commercial and industrial users because the administrative costs associated with enrollment, measurement and verification, and settlement make most smaller loads uneconomical. The residential and small to medium business segments are particularly underserved by demand response, despite being much more numerous. Many residential DR offerings are limited to direct load control of heating equipment. Accurate measurement and verification is either impossible due to a lack of advanced metering or cost prohibitive. So in many cases, utilities estimate the impacts using high-level modeling. Incentives then are typically fixed at a specific dollar amount per year, and they don't necessarily reflect the value of the resource or the frequency of its utilization. Blockchain-based smart contracts can enable more sophisticated DR, all the way up to a two-way negotiation between loads and grid operators based on price and time of day. Connecting IoT devices in homes and businesses can expand the potential pool of resources at very low marginal cost. Small loads like lighting systems and home appliances, which have previously been too costly to administer and enroll, can easily be aggregated and monitored, providing new cost-effective resources for owners and utilities. An automated Near real-time measurement and verification can enable rapid financial settlement via fiat or digital currencies, reducing the amount of time between a DR event and a compensation from weeks to months down to hours or minutes. And this theme can be expanded beyond flexible loads to all forms of distributed resources. Today, small-scale renewables and storage only make financial sense for a small segment of the population. And this is mainly because there are limited opportunities to monetize these assets and they are not utilized to their fullest potential. But fully integrating these distributed resources into the grid is complicated. They need to be carefully managed to support rather than cause problems with grid stability. There are strict confidentiality requirements regarding data sharing. Measurement and verification is complex and time-consuming, and there are limited ways to assign value to DERs in ways that reflect local conditions. Using blockchain in deregulated territories, customers can use the platform to participate directly in wholesale markets and provide multiple grid services. In regulated territories, utilities can create their own blockchain-based platforms to directly transact with their customers and offer incentives to provide similar grid services. With new markets and opportunities for revenue, the financial value of distributed resources increases, which can help support broader financing and deployment across a wider range of segments. From a grid operations perspective, distributed energy resources are more reliable to utilities if there is greater visibility into their availability, guaranteed response driven by smart contracts, and granular performance monitoring. Utilities can also benefit by leveraging distributed resources to defer capital investment or generate new revenue, potentially under service models like leasing resources like batteries to customers for a monthly fee. And the culmination of all of these trends is what we're calling transactive energy, also frequently referred to as peer-to-peer energy trading. And while the current grid architecture and market mechanisms are not well suited for high penetrations of renewables and distributed resources, a bottom-up structure, as I've described here, can very effectively manage this at lower cost. Decentralized applications powered by advanced optimization algorithms can serve the role of a market operator at multiple levels in the hierarchy. There'll be new ways for buildings and assets to transact directly with each other at the neighborhood or regional level, creating novel ways to monetize generation and flexible load. Multi-tenant buildings can devise innovative billing regimes for their tenants and create markets within a building. Balancing the grid from the bottom up also increases the resiliency and lowers total system costs, but it does imply a very different role for utilities. So while this is all possible today from a technology and physics perspective, this vision is probably a long way off from happening and is largely dependent on regulatory change rather than technical innovation. So, what are the implications of all this? And unfortunately, I have more questions than answers. I liken this to seeing the first car phone ever made and trying to predict the future of mobile communications. But it's clear that there are implications of these new technologies that are significant for consumers, regulators, and utilities. For instance, if blockchain allows low-cost access to reliable distributed resources, what are the implications for centralized assets, particularly combined cycle plants that offer flexibility today, and baseload plants, which have very little ability to deviate production up or down? how could radical transparency impact utilities as customers increasingly demand renewable energy? And how could this transparency empower consumers and government to credibly back up claims about sustainability and carbon reduction? I think a really important question to address is, how can utilities benefit from this? If the model for utilities is solely based on selling kilowatt hours and consumers increasingly have options to procure energy from other sources, that is seemingly a threat. But by offering services, creating new platforms and opportunities to transact with customers, this could actually be an opportunity for utilities to earn new revenue streams and adapt to this new system. And on the regulatory and policy front, as there are increasing mandates for either renewable energy standards or carbon emissions reduction, can blockchain enable greater transparency and help organizations, both public and private, achieve climate goals? Well, I think this will help obviously make the case for increasing deployment of these assets. But if barriers to traditional businesses change, how does that change the value proposition for these different stakeholders? So these are the questions that we're wrestling with and working on. And that brings me to the end of my prepared remarks. So thank you very much. And Mike, I will turn it back over to you for Q&A.
All right, thank you, Sam. Appreciate it much. And for those of you who are out there, this is the time to go ahead and send your questions in. I've got a couple questions already, and I'm going to get to those here. Give me just one second here. Okay, so the first one we've got is from Sarah. Sarah's wanting to know, who sets up the blockchain system for energy management? Is that the utility set that up? Is it a municipality? Is it a neighborhood? If we're talking about a community scale, who sets that up?
So I'll just go backwards on the slides here a little bit and maybe help provide some visuals here. So I'd say there's a difference between the blockchain itself and the applications running on it. So for instance, Energy Web Foundation is building an open source blockchain that any public entity will be able to use. So that means startups could build new applications running on this blockchain. It means a utility could build their own proprietary applications on it, or there could be a universal open source standard series of applications or contracts running on it. There are also opportunities for companies like utilities to create their own private blockchain that would limit interaction and accessibility to the outside world. So I guess the answer could really be any of the above or all of the above. Our goal at EWF is to make this blockchain as the standard and default option for building new applications in the energy sector. As a nonprofit, we want to have this technology be more widely adopted in the industry, and we want to support other developers and stakeholders who want to leverage the technology for their own businesses. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit, but happy to follow up more.
Yeah, well, and I imagine you're talking about an open source world. It may be a little difficult to reach a standard. It may be fragmented for a while until maybe market forces kind of rule the day.
Yeah, and I mean, we're working on our own chain, but there are, if you follow the news, there are hundreds of other projects out there. Blockchain is really, I'd say, still in its infancy, and I think there's going to be new standards and new technologies that emerge that we haven't considered yet. There's also other types of distributed ledger technology out there that may supplement or surpass blockchain in terms of functionality. And again, I mean, there will be public blockchains, like say the Ethereum network is the second most widely used blockchain in existence today. And that supports all types of different application developers, other digital tokens, other companies that are using that core network for a new business model. We similarly see the EWF chain as a public network that will support many different types of businesses and applications.
Okay. And as a follow-up, Sarah was asking, how do people access it? I mean, is this something like you go to a website and log in, or is it an app on your phone? How do people access the blockchain they would need?
So right now, the EWF has launched the test blockchain network as of November of this year, and the information is available on GitHub for downloading the client software and setting up a computer to be part of the network. There's also public information on a wiki page that provides more background on how to use it and how to set up your own smart contracts or applications on the network. And so we're encouraging anybody in the public really to start experimenting on the chain. We have until the second quarter of 2019 to run the test network, experiment with different governance structures and different application ideas before the formal launch of the full network. And I can, I think for those who are in the developer community, you should be able to find it by searching for the Tobalaba GitHub repository, or I can follow up with more details on how to access some of that public information after the webinar.
Okay. We've got a question from Seth, and I'm familiar with what he's talking about here. He says, there's been discussion recently regarding the tremendous energy consumption of the Bitcoin network. Has this been addressed with regard to a potential Energy Web Foundation blockchain?
Yes, and that's actually a very timely question. We'll be releasing a blog post about this very topic in the next day or two. So I guess for folks that maybe haven't seen, there's been a lot of press coverage recently about the energy demands for running the Bitcoin network. Some projections have the total energy requirements as roughly on par with the total energy use of Denmark. And as Bitcoin continues to grow in popularity and value, there's concern that the amount of energy use will offset any efforts to reduce carbon emissions or increase renewable energy. The challenge with Bitcoin is really in the design of the network. So Bitcoin relies on a consensus mechanism, which is the process by which all of the computers validate transactions and agree upon adding blocks to the ledger. That's called proof of work. And that mechanism requires computers to solve increasingly difficult mathematical equations that get more difficult as more computing power is added to the network. And the incentive for solving these problems is you earn a Bitcoin reward, and that's where the term mining comes from. And that's also how new blocks are added to the chain. So as it gets more valuable, there's more incentive to add computing power. The problems get more difficult, more computing power is required, or at least desirable, and you have this feedback loop where there's more and more energy use. The Energy Web Foundation chain is intentionally designed to avoid all of those issues and has a number of other benefits as well. So I mentioned this proof of authority consensus mechanism. This is a different way to govern the blockchain, where instead of having a global race between all of the computers in the network, you limit the ability to validate transactions and add new blocks to a defined set of computers. And rather than having them all race each other, every time you need to add a new block, a different computer is selected at random and earns a transaction fee for performing that validation. And so this not only limits the energy requirement because you don't have the same arms race in computing power. It also enables much faster transaction speeds, as I mentioned, several orders of magnitude greater than Bitcoin at the moment, and with an eye towards even further scale in the future. So we're aware of it, and I will say the Bitcoin community is definitely aware of the challenges with Bitcoin itself, but the EWF chain has a very different design that addresses this from the outset.
And you mentioned that Ethereum was the second most used blockchain network. Is Bitcoin the first?
Yes, so Bitcoin is definitely the most popular, and increasingly these days it's hard to go a day or two without seeing it in the headlines, and more people are starting to use it. But Ethereum is definitely a close second.
Right. Got a question from Adam. He wanted to know, what is the biggest challenge with gathering the data on site that's needed to drive and validate the transactions?
Yeah, so I would say the benefit of blockchain is that you are able to get data from a device into a trusted and secure network. There are still challenges upstream with making sure that the data you're collecting is valid and accurate. And so that's something that is more in the realm of the hardware vendors of the world, who are working on ways to better integrate devices with either the internet or with blockchain specifically. There's work that we're doing within EWF to come up with ways to identify potential data quality issues coming from devices and how to remedy those. One of the other big challenges is just data, the volume and scale of data more broadly. If we are to achieve this vision of a transactive grid with all of these internet connected devices transacting with each other, 2,500 transactions per second is a drop in the bucket. It needs to be on the order of millions of transactions per second. For comparison, the Visa credit card network is in the hundreds of thousands of transactions per second today. So it's something that really pushes the boundaries of technology. And then similarly, how do you store all that data? So we're also working on ways to integrate off-chain data storage with the blockchain, so that rather than overloading the blockchain network with a constant stream of data, you could set up different mechanisms to query data from other storage systems, bring it into the blockchain in batches, and reduce the number of transactions that you need on the chain. I hope that at least touched on some of the question there.
Sure. Yeah. I had a couple questions for you too. All that we just talked about, does this apply to electricity generation only, or could it also apply to like natural gas? No, so the EWF blockchain is built with the electricity sector in mind, but the reality is, especially as it's going to be a public network, it could support transactions in really any type of energy, or even direct energy businesses. And so the things like traceability, for instance, could come into play, whether, if for instance, companies wanted to track the source of gasoline or fuel that's going to end consumers and know that it comes from either a conflict-free region or has some other attribute associated with it, that same mechanism that we are focused on for renewable energy credits could be used to track any other type of asset through its life cycle. So I guess the short answer is this is unlikely to be limited strictly to the electricity sector. Gotcha. Okay. Got a couple of utility questions here. Are utilities and/or government entities looking into this if for no other reason, from a security standpoint. I mean, you talked about vulnerable infrastructure. So how much is being devoted to developing this either on the private or the public level?
Yeah, so I'll go back to our affiliate companies. As I mentioned, there's about 20 right now, and we're continuing to add more. We have some of the largest investor-owned utilities in the US as members. We have grid operators and utilities in Europe and in Asia. And they see a lot of opportunity both for internal processes and security of data management, as well as some of the new business models that I talked about. It's definitely appealing for some of the security aspects, but even I'd say in addition, the ability to have that confidential data sharing between parties in a way that is much more streamlined compared to the way that it works now is also really appealing. So this is gaining, I guess, a lot of attention of folks in the utility sector.
Sure. Okay, I can see why. Sarah wants to know, what are the pushbacks that utilities currently have to blockchain and, frankly, the transformation of an entire business model?
Yeah, I mean, I think that last point is exactly it. If we were designing our energy system from scratch today, it would probably look very different, and that, as I mentioned, implies a very different role for the utility. It implies a different role for aggregators. It implies a different role for grid operators. And so, a lot of times when we've been working with some of our partner companies, we get that immediate question of, well, how does this benefit me? Like, doesn't this make my business obsolete? I think realistically, that's a long way from happening. And in the interim, there are a lot of intermediate steps in which utilities and other incumbents can actually benefit from this. We're working, for instance, with suppliers and with utilities in deregulated markets who want a better way of tracking smart meter ownership and customer association over time, which is a really cumbersome process today. And by seeing the value in existing business models, I think helps pave the way to explore new ways to earn revenue. Like I said, if the only way a utility is planning to earn revenue is selling kilowatt hours, that might not be very attractive in the long run. There are a lot of different alternatives, though. For instance, within RMI, we always talk about Thomas Edison's original plan for his utility was to sell lighting. So you pay a fixed fee per month in exchange for getting light bulb as a service. They eventually transitioned to selling electricity as a commodity, not caring what you did with it. But that concept of selling different services rather than the electricity itself is definitely another opportunity for utilities to leverage their existing relationships with customers and expertise in grid management, but offer a new way to earn some revenue that doesn't depend on ever expanding growth in electricity demand.
And, sometimes we see solar or PV treated, I'll diplomatically say, unfairly by utilities, whether that's, a fee or a tariff or, we're going to only reimburse you at wholesale versus retail for what you generate. Would blockchain or something like it help mitigate that kind of negative treatment?
Well, I think there's kind of two separate challenges there. The first is the physical impacts of PV or really any resource on the broader grid. One of the famous challenges that you see in a lot of utility areas in the Western U.S. in particular is the duck curve, where you have midday, very low midday demand that is driven by a lot of behind the meter solar, and then suddenly you have a massive ramp up in demand during your evening peak hours as the solar declines. And so that's a real challenge for the utility or the grid operator to manage. And so there is reason, or at least rationale behind trying to use price signals or other mechanisms to influence the deployment or the behavior of different types of assets. So where I see value in blockchain is, first, as we've talked a lot about, having that granular view into the performance and availability of different resources, including PV, including loads, among others, and then being able to send more sophisticated price signals to specific assets based on locational grid conditions at a specific point in time. Even time of use tariffs, which are increasing in popularity today, have varying electricity rates for maybe an entire system that are solely based on the hours of the day. But if you had the ability to send very specific locational prices to different types of assets, you might be able to incentivize different either deployment or utilization of assets that help support the grid rather than cause broader system challenges.
One more utility question I've got here. You mentioned peer-to-peer earlier, and I just, my own personal opinion, Sam, I don't know if it's as far off as you might think. And where I'm going to point to is the San Francisco Public Utility Commission. They have enabled water sharing agreements between commercial buildings in San Francisco. So they're able to do that on the water side of things. I would hope that, people could look in that direction to see, okay, what's the structure of those types of agreements? And you've got, in essence, a utility saying, okay, we're allowing water to be sold from one commercial building to a neighboring building, and that's in practice now. So.
Oh, it's definitely here, but I would say it's in the pilot phase. There are companies out there like Power Ledger is actually a company that's using a blockchain to do this exact type of peer-to-peer trading in Australia. In the US, there's the Brooklyn building pilot where multiple tenants are having this exact type of transactive market within the building. I think like I said, the technology is there. It is in many places a regulatory challenge. There are many places in the US where it is illegal for any entity that is not the utility to resell electricity. That's why you might see public electric vehicle charging infrastructure charge customers by time, where they can claim that they are not selling electricity, but rather access to a spot with free electricity as a benefit. So it's definitely more something on the regulatory side of things rather than on the technology side of things. And there are already a lot of demonstration projects underway, and we're actually working on two in Europe at the moment at EWF that are making this a reality.
Gotcha. We are at the top of the hour, but we're going to continue. We've got a couple more questions. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to send them in. Sam has agreed to stick around a little bit longer here, and we hope that you all can too. Got a question from Michael, not me, different guy. He wanted to know if you can elaborate a little bit more on why blockchain is required for locational and or targeted pricing signals at an asset level. He says it doesn't really sound inherent to blockchain. Can you expound on that a little bit?
I would say it's not required. There's a lot of different, you could, let's say you're a regulated utility, you could have your own centralized and proprietary application that enables you to perform that same function. Where the value of blockchain is providing that level of transparency to different stakeholders and potentially creating a standard across regions, so that, for instance, if you are a large company with buildings in a variety of different utility locations, you wouldn't have to necessarily figure out the specific regime in every single territory in every building. There could be an open standard. Blockchain is really well suited to issues where you have multiple parties who want or need access to information, who may not trust each other, and the mechanism or process by which they agree to information is challenging. So it's by no means the only way to do it, but we think there are benefits, and particularly when you add in factors like digital wallets and near instantaneous settlement and transfer of value. Again, those are things, we have online banking today, but you're still relying on that third party to control all the transactions. We think that there are benefits to it that make it appealing rather than being the only way to perform that function.
Okay. During your presentation, you mentioned measurement and verification. So who's conducting that measurement and verification? Is that a third party? Is that a utility? Who does that?
So the idea is you could program logic about the rules for measurement and verification into a smart contract or in a distributed application. And then you have the history of performance for a given asset available on the ledger. What blockchain does not solve is some of the methodology questions or challenges. For demand response, for instance, you still have to choose the baseline methodology that you want to measure performance against. Similar for energy efficiency. I guess the benefit comes from the ability to automate that process by taking the data and then running it through an application or a contract to perform that near instantly, and then be able to settle on that in a more streamlined way.
Okay. I'm going to put out the last call for questions. We got one from Adam here. I mean, he's pumped, he's excited, he's inspired. He wants to know, what needs does the Energy Web Foundation have to accelerate their progress? How can the solar and energy management community step up?
Sure. So I would, I guess, first again, put out the plug to for anybody who's interested in looking at developing applications or different use cases. Like I said, the test network is live, and we're encouraging the public to experiment on the network as much as possible and develop new applications. Secondly, for companies that are interested in learning more and engaging, we are recruiting more affiliates through May of 2018. And I guess just to explain that a little bit more, our affiliate companies pay an upfront fee that helps fund the development of the blockchain, and in return, we at Energy Web Foundation support their efforts to develop pilot projects and applications. They get the early access into the new technical features being developed by Grid Singularity and the technical team. We're helping engage regulators and other stakeholders to support some of these efforts. And like I said, there's opportunities for companies to join that way. Otherwise, we are posting as much as we can publicly about what we're learning, about best practices. We will eventually be publishing public open source smart contracts that can be modified by any other party. And it's the last thing is help spread the word that I think especially recently there's been a lot of press and coverage about Bitcoin, and maybe a lot of people think that blockchain is Bitcoin and vice versa, and it's really not the case. This is a a really promising technology that could impact the energy sector. And so the more people that are educated and engaged with it, the better. Okay. And I'll put again how to contact us in my email up just on the last page here.
Yeah, make sure to get that up there so people can jot that down. I'll take the last question. It's kind of a fun one. You mentioned, at least I'm pretty sure you mentioned in your presentation, Raspberry Pi. Now, I know for some it's around lunchtime, but I don't think you're referring to dessert. So can you explain what is a Raspberry Pi in the context of our discussion here?
Yes, a Raspberry Pi is just a really simple computing device that was originally intended to help people learn about programming and running simple applications. And it's grown tremendously in popularity because they are low cost, very little energy, less than a traditional, even incandescent light bulb, and you can run applications on them. It's a simple but powerful computer, effectively. And in the context of the Ewf blockchain, we are supporting different types of computers on the network. So on one end of the spectrum are the validator computers. They maintain a full history of the ledger. They are authorizing or validating transactions. Even compared to some of the other blockchains, they are less computing intensive, but still, something like a traditional server that you might see today. All the way at the other end of the spectrum is we have a software client that'll download onto very simple, Raspberry Pi is not the only thing out there, but simple, lightweight computers that you can essentially turn into, you can turn a device into a network participant by downloading the blockchain software client onto the device, integrating it with some other physical asset, and you have a way to quickly and easily join the network without adding significant energy resources or computing power. So we think it's an exciting way to expand the variety of participants in the network at a relatively low cost and without the same energy challenges that we've seen in other types of blockchains.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions. So, Sam, I want to express my appreciation for joining us today, going through this new and innovative and emerging technology, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you also to our audience for the questions and for attending. And thank you to NV Energy for their generous sponsorship of this webinar and many of the webinars that we had this year, because that does wrap up the Green Builder Media webinar series for 2017. I hope you enjoyed the various topics we explored throughout the year. And I want to let you know if there is a topic you'd like to learn more about, don't hesitate to reach out to Green Builder Media and let them know. And I'm sure they'll take a look at see how they can do a webinar on that topic sometime in 2018. Now, I know it's only 3 weeks away, but if you're going down to Florida for Design and Construction Week, I would encourage you to attend the Green Builder Media Sustainability Symposium at the University of Central Florida campus in Orlando on Monday, January 8th. I'll be there, and I hope I get the chance to meet you if you do go. Now, don't hesitate to come up and say hi in between the sessions or during the networking breaks. I'll be one of the tall guys there and dressed nicely. Or if you plan to be in Vegas, January 9 through 12 to attend the Consumer Electronics Show, which is obviously a very massive show, be sure to visit the Flex House. This is the latest in the Vision House series from Green Builder Media. It's located at booth CP10. I think it's cousin of C3PO, but it's booth CP10. It's located right outside of the Las Vegas Convention Center near the main conference registration tent. So if I don't see you in Orlando, and I'm not going to be in Vegas, then I hopefully will see you back here in 2018. Have a Happy New Year, everyone, and I hope you find time to relax and enjoy this holiday season. Stay safe out there. Take care.